You're listening to Season 11 of Mobile Suit Breakdown, a weekly podcast covering the entirety of sci-fi mega franchise Mobile Suit Gundam from 1979 to today.
This is episode 11.20, His Man Raymond, and we're your hosts. I'm Tom, a longtime Gundam fan, and this week my interests in Gundam and classic detective fiction intersect in a very unexpected way.
And I'm Nina, new to G Gundam, and seriously, what is the definition of moe? As an ad-free independent podcast, Mobile Suit Breakdown relies on our inimitable and impassioned paying subscribers. Thank you all, and special thanks to our newest patrons, Terribly Sorry, C. Connor H., and Patrick K. You keep us Genki.
This week we're covering G Gundam episode 20, Giorgio Akumuo Uchi Kudake, or George, Beat the Nightmare, originally broadcast on September 2nd, 1994. The episode this week, and actually episode 19 last week as well, saw the arrival of a new Eikante, or storyboard artist, Tsunaga Tsukasa. Tsunaga has been a storyboard artist almost his entire career, but around the turn of the millennium he got his crack at directing, helming a string of moderately well-regarded but now mostly forgotten shows like Shadow Skill, Eden's Bowie, and Magical Meow Meow Taruto, as well as the first season of Dirty Pair Flash. After 2001, though, he went back to doing storyboards exclusively, working on Planets, Samurai Champloo, Noain, To Your Other Self, Tiger and Bunny, and over 100 episodes of Yu-Gi-Oh! But now, the play-by-play.
Welcome, listeners, to What Would Jeeves Do, the #1 advice show in the Earth sphere. I am your Jeeves, and this week we have something really special, a request for advice from a real-life gentleman's gentleman. Today's letter comes from someone very concerned about privacy for reasons that will become obvious in the letter, so we have omitted names or used pseudonyms where appropriate. He writes, "Dear Jeeves, I have held a position of trust and responsibility in a prominent family for more than 45 years, and currently serve as butler and valet to the scion of the family, a young man in his early 20s whom I have known since his infancy. Recently, he has been most unlike himself, short-tempered, plagued by nightmares and strange fugues in which he seems near mad with terror. My typically diligent and conscientious master seems disinterested in his work or his normal course of training and study. This young man's vocation is dangerous and involves a great deal of responsibility and public scrutiny. Recent difficulties may be the cause of his current malaise. He was involved in an accident in which many bystanders were hurt and killed, and suffered a period of severe illness during which he lost control of his actions. Though neither incident was his fault, he feels even these unintentional harms very keenly. I have made every effort to assist him. When my usual methods failed, I contacted a doctor of our acquaintance, hoping my master would agree to an examination, but he refused. My suggestion that he seek assistance from a respected peer in the same field was also refused. In desperation, I must confess that I went behind his back to that same peer seeking advice, but the young master caught me and I have been dismissed. What can I do? How can I help him? At this juncture, I am afraid not only for his work, but for his safety, his health, his life, his very soul. This is not the courtly, chivalrous, principled young man I raised. Sincerely, Raimundo Obispo." A difficult situation, which unfortunately you've made worse for yourself by breaking this young man's trust. You have perhaps had difficulty adjusting your behavior as your master, who, as you say, you have known since infancy, left childhood behind and entered adulthood. In this new dynamic, his trust in you is your best guarantee of being able to help. Although the harm is probably not irreparable, you will need to repair this breach if you're to do any good. Unless he intends to retreat from the world and become a hermit, an unlikely choice for wealthy and famous young men, inevitably life will assert itself. Another dangerous situation will arise in his work. Perhaps an old rival will track him down seeking vengeance. The time will come sooner rather than later when he will need to face his fears and conquer his self-doubt. In that moment, he will realize he needs help, and you need to be there when that happens. That way, you can perhaps prevent some of his mistakes and keep those you cannot prevent from being excessively consequential. Be his backup. Remind him of the values and principles he was raised with. Encourage positive friendships. And surely you can help him to not just return to his old self, but to continue to grow and improve. Please write back and let us know how it goes.
Do you think, when the team that made G Gundam sat down to make this episode, they intended for it to be this homoerotic?
I don't see how it could have been an accident.
I agree with you there. I think somebody looked at the concept, the cast. They looked at G Gundam as had been created so far, because I don't think this was the intention when they started planning the show out. But I think somebody looked at this show and said, well, obviously it's super gay. You've got all the different types of man, all the different types of desirable man.
Every type of man.
There are practically no women. The ones who are there are essentially in like supportive roles on the sidelines watching the men go at each other.
Go at each other.
The thing that cinched it in my mind, the thing that made me go like, oh, okay, they know exactly what they're doing in this episode, is when George is having his like pink cloud flashbacks to all of the good times with Raymond when he was younger. The scene where Raymond is like arranging a little display on a table and there's a fan.
And there's a small sculpture of... It's one of those ones of like a human body, but only from the like hips to the neck.
Just like it's a little bit weird, the sculpture. Yeah. It imposes itself on the scene rather. But the centerpiece of this vignette and the thing that Raymond is actually talking about is a vase of red roses. And roses are the gay male equivalent of lilies for women. Bara is the gay man version of Yuri. It's like the signifier at this point in time of male homoeroticism. If you switched all of the genders and you made that a vase of lilies, there would be no question in anyone's mind what you were doing.
It's also long been an archetype of gay relationships. The older, wiser, more experienced man who's sort of like teaching and inducting the younger into culture.
Mm-hmm. Putting those roses there is the early 90s equivalent of when they say that Char and Garma were friends at the academy together. We know what that means in the same way that people of Tomino's generation knew what it meant for two young men who were at the Naval Academy together to have an intimate relationship. They were swabbing each other's decks.
But leaving that aside, the first time we watched the episode, there were moments where things about the way it had been animated, the poses they had used, so on, struck me some kind of way. And I thought to myself, maybe I'm reading too much into this. And then I watched it again, and no, I'm not reading too much into it. There are numerous points, especially when Raymond is in his mobile suit. Like, sometimes it's played more goofy, silly, sort of SD style.
A little Wile E. Coyote Looney Tunes.
But there are multiple poses that feel feminine. That feel damsel in distress-like.
And he's given, like, the way he blushes.
He has the, in classic anime style, like, larger, brighter, more expressive eyes, which often are given to younger characters or to women. Mm-hmm. The clumsiness of Raymond at times can also be like an anime girl trait. Mm-hmm. His expression in some of the flashbacks where he's smiling with his mouth slightly open and like big bright eyes and everything is all glowy.
Though, of course, he's also a member of the support crew. And like we were talking about a few weeks ago, most of the support crews are women, or at least the like lead members of them are women. And when they're not women, they tend to be men in feminized, subservient, or like demasculinized roles, like monks, like butlers, like servants.
It occurs to me now that there are certain things about the way Raymond is portrayed that sort of feminize him, that self-sacrificial devotion, the way in which he's obviously loving but a bit overbearing, a bit smothering perhaps.
Motherly.
In his worry for George.
Clucking around like a mother hen, you might say.
But other things we learn about him in this episode make a stronger case for it being like a gay romance parallel rather than simply a man in a support and feminized role. Specifically that he is the one who taught George to fence, that he clearly was a fighter himself at some point. Sidebar that I love his really old mobile fighter that appears to have truck controls.
Well, it's got like a really old-fashioned like starter that he pulls out to go into super mode.
And then it starts like vibrating and chugging like a diesel engine.
It probably is a diesel engine. I mean, there's a very poignant, sad story here that Raymond raised George up, changed his diapers, taught him how to fight, taught him how to live, taught him about honor and love, taught him about how to appreciate beauty. But now Raymond, who must have been a very good fighter in his youth to have taught George, he's old and he's weak, and the things about him that George must have admired when he was growing up have been lost to time, and that's really sad. And it, at first, it seems to George as though he doesn't really need Raymond anymore because of the way their roles have changed. And it's only over the course of the episode that they realign their relationships to each other, that George comes to understand the absolute depths of Raymond's devotion to him.
See, I don't think it's that logical.
Well, of course it's not logical. It's all emotion.
Sure, but like, I don't think George fires Raymond because George thinks to himself, I don't need a butler anymore.
No, but at the beginning when they're dueling, right? And Raymond can't keep up with George. Mm-hmm. There's a certain sadness and a certain disdain in George's affect towards him. There is a feeling there before he fires him of like, it's nice to have you around for old time's sake, but I'm not really getting any benefit out of this anymore. I don't really need you anymore. And while that may not have been the reason he fired Raymond, that wasn't the inciting incident, it was there. It was in the mix.
But by the end of the episode, that hasn't changed.
Yes, it has.
How? Why?
Because what Raymond displays at the end is not merely devotion, but courage. Even though his body is breaking down, he still throws himself into the fight. He still absorbs all of those blasts. He still has the heart of a warrior butler, some sort of combat butler, even.
I suppose. It is worth remembering also that as smooth as we see George behave most of the time, he is still fairly young.
Mm-hmm.
And when they first left Shinjuku, Raymond is the one who went up to thank Rain for all of her help and kissed her hand. And George was surprised. It hadn't even occurred to him that he ought to go thank Rain.
Why might George be surprised to see his gay butler kissing the hand of a woman?
Because it's about showing respect and appreciation, not about romance.
Exactly. George needed to learn that. He still needs to learn that, maybe.
But what's sort of moving about Raymond, looking back over this episode for me, is that while he has this very close and privileged relationship with George, he doesn't expect to be the only person who has that. He's not possessive.
Mm-hmm.
He is the one who thinks George needs other training partners, that George needs to have other people of similar skill and ability to fight.
Well, and maybe their reunion at the end is made possible by the fact that George has realized he can fight with these other young men. He doesn't need Raymond for that. But he still needs Raymond for other things and wants Raymond for other things.
You can love someone and keep someone around regardless of how useful they are to you.
Even if they're a servant.
And maybe we all need someone to look after us. Maybe we all need that in our lives.
Yeah.
It's interesting. What is your read on why George is so resistant to the suggestion of working with another fighter? Because he is clearly not himself. He's having hallucinations. He's terrified. He's irritable. He's had these overkill moments. He has very obviously gritted teeth during that first dinner with Rain in a way that seems totally uncharacteristic. Is he ashamed? Is he in denial? Does he think he ought to be able to do it all on his own?
Well, I mean, of course he thinks he ought to be able to do it all on his own. He's a young man. They are, all of them in this arc, learning they need to rely on each other. Especially they need to rely on Domon. Rain points this out, like, Domon, you've been so popular lately. All of these other men are coming to you for help. Male friendship must be so nice. This is another point where they're just making it pretty obvious, raising the subtext to just below the surface of the water.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to gloss quickly over the gender of it all, because what does that statement from Rain imply about female friendships? But anyway, as if this show cares about female friendship. Domon still insisting none of this has anything to do with me, still resistant to really actually taking up the mantle of King of Hearts.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, there's the Gundam fight, dude, but there is also the Shuffle Alliance, and you are the ostensible leader of it, and these are members of it, and you're going to act like their well-being has nothing to do with you? Like, what?
Yeah, he seemed surprised when the Shuffle Alliance crest was able to cleanse the DG cells.
Which apparently does not require the holder of the crest to die, so...
Maybe because the infection was not as advanced.
Perhaps.
Or, the older members of the Shuffle Alliance, they were old. And as a certain Gundam boy once said, adults should have children and then die. And while the Shuffle Alliance, we don't know if they had biological children or not, but by passing on their crests to the next generation, in a sense, they had children and then they died. Tomino would be very pleased. With George, we find out now that it's not just the encounter with the Devil Gundam, but also this traumatic incident a year prior, the tragedy of Marseille. Tragic things always happen in Marseille. The Count of Monte Cristo, the assassination of King Alexander of Yugoslavia, although he was a tyrant, so is that really tragic? Who knows?
You'll think of a third one.
Well, no, see, now I'm trying to think of whether that was actually tragic or not, because it did materially contribute to the onset of World War II. I'll think about it. Anyway, I think the thing with George is that because he blames himself for this tragedy, at least in part, he feels like he has to be perfect. This naturally plays into his existing characterization, like he is the perfectionist type. All of his battles have to be elegant and beautiful. Everything has to be just so. A speck of dust on my sleeve? Ugh! I am ashamed. And to admit that he needs help, to admit that he has trauma, is to admit that he's not perfect.
There's also the hallucination or nightmare that recurs a couple of times in the episode, so we know it's meant to be significant, that involves Mère Louise being snatched up by the Devil Gundam, which, paired with the flashbacks of the Marseille tragedy, gets at what I think the core fear for George is, which is that George cannot protect everyone. George cannot prevent any and all harm from happening to his country, to his people.
And that acting to save one person might result in another person being harmed. Right? That's what happened at the tragedy of Marseille. He goes to prevent Mirabeau from killing the head of state, and instead a whole bunch of spectators get killed.
Which obviously is not George's fault. George didn't fire the missiles. George wasn't trying to hurt anyone. Yet George recognizes that he wields this incredible power through the mobile fighter, through the Rose Gundam, and feels the weight of that very keenly. Obviously, needs must in the narrative, but for real, why would you have the stands so close to a Gundam fight to begin with? Why would you pack a bunch of stands full of people that close to a couple of horrifying giant death machines?
Don't worry about it. They're there so that they can die. They're there to be motivational.
The giant torch stood out to me as being rather Olympic torch-like. So I checked, and France had just hosted the Winter Olympics in 1992.
Ah, okay. I could see it. You moved rather quickly past the gender of it all, but I'll have you know that this episode introduces a female Gundam fighter.
Is it the one George goes overkill on?
Yes! Chelsea Walesa of Neo-Poland in the Magnat Gundam.
Well, since we never meet her or see her, I don't see how that's relevant.
But the lore, Nina!
Uh-huh.
It's so gender.
I mean, it's very gender in this show to go in after the fact and be like, oh yeah, that fighter was a woman. That fighter you never saw.
Women should be neither seen nor heard, is the attitude here.
The flashback to the Marseille tragedy also, hammered on one of the themes of the show yet again, because we have Mirabeau saying, I will do anything to attain victory. It's this pursuit of winning, pursuit of power at any price and for its own sake, without any deeper or more meaningful rationale behind it.
Well, he wants revenge. And who wouldn't want a little revenge?
Well, and he is frustrated by the fact that in the case of Neo-France, the head of state, or whoever it was who was empowered to make this decision, decided, actually, I can call an end to the fight right here, and I can choose based not on who won, but on who I think better represents us.
Surely, a would-be Gundam fighter for Neo-France, the colony that is shaped like a bouquet of flowers, ought to have understood that.
Not merely shaped like a bouquet of flowers, but also covered with some sort of space castle or chateau, where they make both the mobile fighters and the pilots of those mobile fighters wear old school uniforms of some kind.
With sashes and silly little hats. Love all the silly little hats.
So many silly little hats. Oh, I forgot to say about Raymond's mobile fighter. Did you notice he enters through the top of the head?
Yeah.
Rather than through the chest? That was weird.
That was fun. Well, I love the bit where he sort of rises up out of it like like a elevator on a stage.
Powerful motor.
In his elegant butler bow. There's a bit in the Gunbuster OVA where the robot emerges similarly out of a spaceship with a similar sort of elevator system. And it's doing its cool, like, arms crossed, tough guy pose.
Well, rising up out of the floor is classic. And then even Mirabeau's mobile fighter, the Mirage Gundam, has the look of a uniform of some kind.
And we'll talk about that more in the research section.
Ooh. And he has pale blue-green hair and face paint, and his fight suit has a big old shark mouth on it for some reason.
He looks super evil. He looks like a villain out of Fist of the North Star or some other post-apocalyptic
or villain of the week. I was gonna say, like, he could be a villain in Sailor Moon or
an alternate for Kiss, the band.
The Mirage Gundam has a spiked codpiece thing going on.
That's how you know he's evil. Put some spiked codpieces on there. And then it gets the, like, I thought this was actually cool. The sort of nest of wires or cables. It looks like a wasp's nest, like a mud dauber's nest that grows out of the back that he shoots the missiles out of.
Right, yeah. It has a very organic look to it. I like that you mentioned mud daubers. I was trying to think, what does that look like? But yeah, like a wasp or a...
Yeah, a wasp's nest. Tentacles coming out of the back.
Yep.
Almost like extra arms.
Yep.
Funny hat. Character dresses like the most obvious villain in fiction. Welcome back, Neo-Cuba's Arachno Gundam. And then in his savage rage after George has more or less disabled the Mirage Gundam, he rips the arm off of it. A lot of arms being ripped off lately.
In George's case, if you wanted to be poetic about it, you could see it as coming out of his fear is of feeling helpless, of being helpless in the face of potential harm to people he cares about. And by ripping the arm off of this other mobile suit, he renders it helpless. Now it can't do anything.
Mm-hmm. It also reminded me of earlier in the episode when he rips the head off of the Magnat Gundam. And he's like holding it up. He's sort of showing off for an imaginary crowd. This is his trophy. It's certainly not elegant, and it lacks the affectation of disinterest that he has always before this maintained during battle.
Yeah, this was an episode that had many moments that looked very strange, and we'll get into that, but they did a lovely job on some of the close-ups of George's face in the cockpit, and seeing his face just like stretched with rage feels so alien and kind of wrong. Which is probably why Raymond tells him that his true opponent is himself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, none of this is actually about any one other fighter. This is about George's own fears or insecurities or worries.
This is one of the major theoretical justifications for the practice of the martial arts, that the martial arts are about self-improvement, overcoming yourself, your own doubts, your weaknesses, your other personality issues. And it's telling that it comes from Raymond, because it's tempting to think of the martial arts as a way to overcome an opponent, a way to get stronger, a way to be able to fight effectively. But frankly, in the world we live in today, if you want to fight effectively, buy a gun. And if you want to protect yourself, you'll get a lot more benefit out of situational awareness and being able to run.
Maybe pepper spray.
Right.
Like,
the martial arts are not really about self-defense.
yeah.
But they can be about self-improvement. And Raymond, because he's older, because his body is failing him, he has had to come face to face with the fact that no matter how much he trains, no matter how strong he was in his youth, he's not going to beat George, he's not going to beat Argo or Domon or Saisaishi, he's not going to beat any of these younger men. And yet, he still feels that there's some value in the martial arts that he's learned and taught. And he looks for that value and he finds it in self-improvement.
Well, and that in his lived experience, in the fact that he's just lived longer than any of the people you mentioned, he has some wisdom and insight to offer. He, after all, understands that what is likely to help George the most is to fight.
Mm-hmm. But also, the skills you develop fighting, the power that you have, can be used for other things as well. The show, because it's a kid's show, because they want to spell this out, makes this very explicit with what Schwarzbruder tells Domon towards the end. But they also do it in a really lovely, subtler way. When Domon puts his hand on, or rather puts the Shining Gundam's hand onto the shoulder of the Rose Gundam.
I loved that scene.
And you see the little, the red flash on George's shoulder from the mobile trace system haptic feedback. This is the same thing that hurts him in battle.
And George even reaches over from inside the cockpit to touch his own shoulder, as one might do, like reaching over to touch the hand of someone when they've rested their hand on your shoulder.
Exactly.
Oh, it was so great.
Like these bodies that we possess, and in the show, the machines that they possess, are capable of incredible violence, but also of comfort, also of intimacy. That Domon's super mode activates not when he's fighting, but when he's trying to restrain George.
Schwartz's role in this episode is a bit different. He crops up late. We get presented with this dichotomy of when it's okay to interfere in someone else's fight and when it's not. Because initially, when George is terrified and struggling to even get in the Rose Gundam and fight back against Mirabeau, Domon is going to go handle it and Schwartz stops him. However, once George is in red mist blackout rage and overkill mode, then it's okay for Domon to get involved. And in some ways, this demonstrates that while we have mostly seen Schwarzbruder following Domon around, it would seem that he also cares about these other fighters and members of the Shuffle Alliance. He cares about what happens to them and that they get over these like blocks that they have. And for all that he makes that nice little speech at the end about how the super mode can be fueled by care for another person rather than just by rage, Schwartz is surprised when it deploys. He was not expecting that. What?
I mean, it's so easy to read every part of this episode through an explicitly, like, gay lens. Domon isn't just restraining George, he's, like, hugging George from behind.
Yes.
Right? It's a very close, intimate moment between the two of them when Domon's super mode activates. And the super mode seems to also affect George. Like, they're both sort of caught up in this bright golden light.
Well, and it's a very close and intimate friend who can save you from yourself.
Very much so. And perhaps that scene with Rain earlier, where she's like, oh, all these men keep coming to find you in the middle of nowhere because they need your help solving their various problems. Male friendship must be so nice. You can sort of see this as Rain being like, I know. You may not know, but I know. And Bruder's surprise at seeing Domon's super mode activate under these circumstances could be him going, oh. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Rain saying friendship in quotes. When she expresses envy, it's not because she doesn't have female friends. It's because Domon is being pursued by so many guys.
And how can she compete with all of them? If she wants Domon for herself.
Domon is the prettiest girl at the Gundam fight.
Everyone wants to be on his dance card.
One point that the show seems to be making is that each of these characters, and in their own way, they're like a proxy for any person, for the viewer, right? That we need, or I suppose I should say young men need, both of these kinds of relationships in their life, both of these kinds of energy, which is to say someone who can show you devotion and nurturing and care, but also someone who can be harsher with you. Specifically, after George has fired Raymond and before Raymond has come back, before the big fight at the end, George is telling them why he fired Raymond. And Domon says, but aren't you the one who brought shame on your family? That's not Raymond's fault. And Rain makes this expression like she's thinking, oh, but you should have eased into it or phrased it differently. Like, not that he's wrong, but that he has said this in the most blunt and combative way he could have, which is not what she would do and is not what Raymond would have done, but that perhaps George needs to hear that from one of his peers. Unfortunately, this is also a scene where they have drawn Domon directly facing the camera, and what did they do to his teeth? His teeth look so weird. It's so weird and bad.
It's not the best looking episode, maybe, but it is super dynamic and very fun.
I quite enjoyed the little slapsticky stuff with Raymond and Raymond's mobile suit.
Trying to jump across a chasm, falling in the river, and having to swim.
Yeah, it was one of those. It was the fight with George at the very beginning, and then when he first, just barely makes it across the chasm and collapses at the edge before the edge falls into the river. The way he sits, the way he kind of falls down and into a seated position in both of those scenes is a pose that I tend to think of as feminine. Mm-hmm. Like both legs to one side, kind of. I don't know.
Well, we joked when we were, because it's not just that it's feminine, it's specifically a feminine coded anime pose. We joked when we were watching the episode the first time that they've made Raymond very moe. The term had not actually come into use yet at the time that this was made, but he borrows a lot of his depiction from Usagi Sailor Moon running to school. when he's like charging through the forest, that's Usagi being late to school.
Mm-hmm.
They should have had a giant slice of bread hanging out of the mouth of his mobile suit. When he falls in the middle of the battle, that's like the clumsy cute girl with those like swirly glasses who falls with her big pile of books. These are the tropes that they're drawing from for him.
Yeah, moe is one of those terms that it seems people really struggle to define. Because it's cuteness, but it's not just cuteness.
There's like an element of pain in it. A certain sort of pain you feel looking at the cuteness.
We'll probably get into that in later series when it's more relevant. As you said, not a term commonly in use. But I did, on our first watch through of this episode, look over at Tom and go, they made Raymond kind of moe.
It's largely faded into the background, but Domon is still struggling with that sword. Now he's doing exercises with the mobile suit's sword, cutting through the waterfall that way, which is probably easier. The funniest outcome of this is if he finally cuts through a tree with that jacked up, chipped, pitted, rusty old sword and goes to show Schwarzbruder, and Bruder is just like, "What? How did you do that? This is weird. I gave you that sword to demonstrate the importance of taking care of your equipment. The lesson I was trying to impart was maintain your mobile suit properly."
The one sort of cap to all of that, to Domon's training in this episode, is that Domon has come to the realization that it's not something he's going to be able to fix quickly. That his desire to kind of master the super mode of the Shining Gundam is going to take some time, and there's no easy solution. I'm trying to predict what's going to happen next, since now we have been visited by each member of the Shuffle Alliance.
Do you think they each left after their respective episodes, or have they all just like parked in different parts of the Highlands for more training? Are they still around?
I think some of them might have stayed in the region, but not nearby. Nastasha was getting a lot of pressure from her bosses to go fight some Gundam fights.
But they have to repair the bolt. I imagine even in this world, it takes a little while to repair a fully ripped off arm. Though we also don't know how much time is passing between episodes.
One final nitpick. It feels very silly for the characters to only just now be realizing that the super mode can be fueled by emotions other than rage and the desire for vengeance. Because when he's deploying it, Domon even says, "My rage, my love, and all of my sorrow."
Sure.
He mentions 2 other emotions.
Those are just words, Nina. They don't mean anything. I mean, for the audience, the intended audience of, let's be honest, middle school boys, all of this functions as a metaphor for your own wild and uncontrollable emotions. And at the end, when Domon is like, "I guess my wild super mode is just going to be difficult to control, difficult to get a handle on," at a certain point, when you're talking with teenagers, you just have to say, like, yeah, it's going to take some time. Sorry. You're just going to be like this for a while. Like, no amount of rationalizing it or understanding where it's coming from is going to make those hormones behave. And in my experience, when you're that age, the main things you feel are anger, sorrow, and something that passes for love.
Was the best solution to go fight with your friends about it?
I wish I had had friends to fight with. I could have used a Delmon to tell me I was being a jerk. I'm sure I was. It's much less satisfying fighting with your enemies. This week, the appearance of 3 new Neo-French mobile suits or mobile fighters, including Jean-Pierre Mirabeau's sinister Mirage Gundam, gives me the opportunity for a rapid reference research rundown. I'll be talking about possible, dare I say probable, inspirations for the designs and the names of the new mobile suits, and some of the characters. Ready? Right. Let's dance. First, Jean-Pierre Mirabeau. Knowing Imagawa's predilections, it is tempting to think that the Jean-Pierre part of his name might have been chosen to honor a famous French director, like neo-noir impresario Jean-Pierre Melville, or an actor, like Jean-Pierre Aumont. Perhaps. Frankly, the given name is just too generic to speculate beyond that. Mirabeau, on the other hand, offers no such difficulty. The name means a beautiful view, and there's really only two plausible origins. The first is a town in the Provence region of southern France, about 50 kilometers, 30 miles, or 25,700 toises, northeast of Marseille. The settlement is ancient, defensible, and well situated at the crossing point of the Durance River. A medieval-era fortress, the Château de Mirabeau, overlooked the town and controlled the river crossing, but it was destroyed in the 16th century, then sold off, along with the lordship of the town, to a family of prosperous merchants out of Marseille, the Riquettis, who rebuilt the chateau. In 1749, the same Riquetti family produced the second and more likely inspiration for Jean-Pierre Mirabeau's surname, Honoré Gabriel Riquetti, Count of Mirabeau, one of the most infamous figures in the French Revolution, and usually known simply as Mirabeau. Although nobly born, Mirabeau fell out with his father, a highly esteemed economist, fairly early in life. The two had never been close, but in his youth, the younger Mirabeau turned out to be something of what you might call a complete scumbag. That's the technical terminology. In 1772, for example, he set his sights on a wealthy 18-year-old heiress, Emily, already engaged to another man. When she did not respond to his attempts at seduction, he bribed his way into her home and then contrived to be seen by passers-by on the balcony of her room wearing only his underwear. And it worked, because whatever Emily's father believed, the scandal was real, and Emily's family felt that they had no choice but to marry the daughter off to the young man who had supposedly dishonored her. But this was no passionate love affair. Mirabeau had only wanted Emily for her father's money, and in this respect his plan failed. He received only a tiny annuity from his new father-in-law, less than half of what he received from his own fairly impoverished father, and it was vastly inadequate to meet his debts. So 2 years later, young Mirabeau contrived to have himself arrested by the king's agents, because as long as he was imprisoned by the crown, he could not be tossed into the far less pleasant and more disgraceful debtor's prison where he belonged. While in prison, he was given permission to visit the nearby town, where he met the beautiful young wife of a local aristocrat and ran off with her, although she died a few years later. Mirabeau would spend the next decade or so in and out of jail, traveling Europe, writing inflammatory pamphlets, and causing more scandals, right up until 1789, when France's desperate financial situation forced King Louis to call the Estates General for the first time in nearly 2 centuries. Seeing an opportunity, Mirabeau returned home and got himself elected as a representative, not of the noble First Estate to which he had been born — he tried, they didn't want him — but rather of the Third Common Estate instead. In Paris, he quickly became one of the loudest voices in the Third Estate and a leading figure in the influential Jacobin Club. His various revolutionary achievements are beyond the scope of this piece, but suffice it to say he was important and beloved enough that when he died in 1791, he was buried in the Pantheon, the temple dedicated to liberty where the greatest heroes of the Revolution were interred. Indeed, he was the first such great hero to be buried there. But then, just over a year later, tensions between the revolutionary government and the king came to a head, and a force of National Guardsmen stormed the Tuileries Palace, slaughtering the regiment of Swiss mercenaries protecting the royal family and ransacking the building. In the course of that ransacking, they discovered a locked chest containing secret correspondence between the royal couple and Honoré Gabriel Riquetti, alias Mirabeau. It turned out that, for the last year of his life, the great hero of the Revolution had secretly been a paid agent of the king, working on his behalf to impede the Republicans in government, sabotage the revolution, and was the whole time devising schemes to restore the monarch to a central position in the new system of government. In short, though once seen as a hero, in his last years he disgraced himself and was remembered as an enemy of the French nation.
Did they remove his remains from the Pantheon?
Yes. Yes, they did. So is that why this shark-mouthed Kiss cover band backup guitar player-looking villain is called Mirabeau? Well, Imagawa himself cautions us not to read too much into any of the names. In the G-Files interviews, the director was asked whether Schwarzbruder got his name from the early 20th century German-language young adult novel about chimney sweeps, Die Schwarzen Brüder, or The Black Brothers. But he explained that he created most of the character names, including that one, simply by asking G Gundam's literature coordinator, Kitajima Hiroaki, to assemble lists of names from all over the world, along with thematically appropriate words in different languages, and then mixed them around to create combinations that sounded like names. According to him, Sayet, the Turkish Gundam fighter from episode 11, was the only side character whose name he really thought about. But even if that's true for the side characters, I don't know that it extends to the mobile suits, because several of the ones appearing in this episode have what seem to me to be very characteristically Imagawa names. But we'll get to them in time. As Nina noted during the talkback, the Mirage Gundam, Gundam Rose, and the guard suits destroyed in the opening sequence have all been built with heads that resemble historical military headgear. The Rose wears a bicorn, famously associated with Napoleon Bonaparte, and worn athwart, as was popular in the 1790s. Brief aside, it's actually really ironic that the bicorn has become so iconic because it was not worn for a particularly long period of time. It just happened to be a period of time that was very eventful in a military sense, and about which a great many paintings and movies and other visual depictions have been made since. Anyway, the guard suits are wearing the stiff, tall, visored shako or shako cap. This was the iconic hat of the latter part of the Napoleonic Wars, coming into popular use in most European and American armies around 1800 or thereafter, and remaining popular up through the middle of the 19th century, when it was replaced, in French armies, by the lighter, shorter kepi. The kepi was more practical for soldiers who were fighting in hot climates, which the French increasingly had to do following that country's 1830 invasion and colonization of Algeria. And it is the kepi that has been incorporated into the Mirage Gundam. The Mirage has a couple of other distinctive features. The red stripes on the forearms that look like markers of rank on the cuffs of a soldier's jacket, the extended pauldrons from which hang what look like wings or perhaps a cape, and those 4 weird horns on the sides of its head. I think the horns are just there to look menacing and devilish like the spiked codpiece. The rest of it, though, taken together, gives the general impression of a uniform. Some people I've talked to about this have suggested that it might be the uniform of the French Foreign Legion, and while there are some elements that have that vibe, it's missing most of the distinctive features. It doesn't really have the long, flowing linen head wrap that hangs down from the kepi in typical depictions of the French Foreign Legion. It's not carrying an axe. It doesn't have a beard. Rather, I think in context it's meant to be a soldier's uniform from the early to mid-20th century. Though we think of the greatcoat as the iconic French uniform of World War I, capes, like the one on the Mirage, were still worn by some units. I was able to find examples of capes that were worn by chasseurs, aviators, and alpine regiments, but there were probably others. The kepi with cape uniform was also adopted by the National Police and remained a part of their uniform until 1967. The now 60-year-old look remains iconic enough that you can still find people online selling costumes based on it. Largely, this enduring popularity is because French police officers in capes showed up in a lot of movies. But at the same time, the way the cape breaks into discrete vertical sections gives it a strong resemblance to the downward-pointing feathers on the outstretched wings of the imperial eagles carried by regiments in Napoleon's Grande Armée. The other new suits are Raymond's butler machine and the aforementioned guard suit, whose name is given in English as Godarl. Besides the shako it's wearing, the Godarl is done up in a tricolor design. Its predominant color is the powdery horizon blue worn by French soldiers in the latter part of World War I, but it also has red accents in the form of maneuvering thrusters on the tips of its shoulders, made to look like bright red epaulets, and a blazon of white splashed across its chest, reminiscent of the decorative braid worn by many 19th century soldiers. More interesting to me than the design is the name. The Japanese name is Godaru, And in source books like the Gundam Perfect file, as I said, it's romanized to Godarl. And you can see how they got there. The long ah sound in Godaru is often used for the r sound, and the ru at the end could easily be an L sound. But Godaru is not just a made-up combination of sounds like Gelgug. No, Godaru is the katakana for someone's name, the famous French New Wave director Jean-Luc Godard. And that strikes me as the kind of reference that an Imagawa-helmed production would not make by accident. To speculate a little, I suspect this is similar to the Hermes Elmeth situation, where alternative readings of ambiguous characters are chosen specifically to give the production a little bit of plausible deniability. The name of the butler machine presents a thornier problem. The Japanese is Batora Benson Mamu, but you'll see it romanized as the pretty inaccurate Bensoman, or, more rarely, as the Bensonmum. Bandai's G Gundam website only mentions it as a vintage mobile suit as part of Raymond's character profile, and the name is left in katakana in most of the source books that I consulted. It appeared in a few video games, but none have been officially translated. A toy version was sold in the US back in 2003, but it was packaged together with a battle-damaged Rose Gundam, and only the Gundam was named on the package. The butler is just there, on the side, uncredited and unacknowledged. The earliest official-ish source I could find with the romanization was the 2013 edition of the sourcebook Mobile Suit Illustrated, which called it the Bensoman. But that name had already entered fan use at least as early as November 2006, when it appeared in an English-language guide on GameFAQs for SD Gundam G Generation Portable for the PSP. The guide's author cited Mecha Anime HQ's Burke's All the World's Mobile Weapons Encyclopedia for the romanized name. The old Burke's page is now retired, but it was captured numerous times by archive.org, so I was able to go digging.
Hang on, sorry. It's called Burke's?
Burke's.
Like Burke's Peerage?
I don't think that was the intention. I don't actually know where the Burke's comes from. It's a play on the, Jane's series of magazines about real-world weapons.
Ah.
I think Burke might be the name of the person who put it together in the first place.
Funny coincidence.
The G Gundam machines were first added to the Burke's list in 2002, while the show was on the air in the US. But at the time, the second part of the machine's name was dropped completely, and it was just listed as Butler. This changed between the 13th and 16th of November 2006, when it became Butler Bensoman. Interestingly, the oldest extant use of the more accurate Bensonmum online is also from Mecha Anime HQ, in this case from a G Gundam episode summary from 2001. The Burke's page then switched to Bensonmum in 2015 or perhaps early 2016. There are not as many captures from this period. But by then, the Gundam Wiki had adopted Bensoman, ensuring its continued popularity in English-speaking fandom. MAHQ has stuck to their guns since 2016, and they still call it the Bensonmum. And they're right to do so. You see, when I first saw the katakana Bensonmamu, I initially thought that it might be a reference to the somewhat popular American sitcom Benson, about a butler by that name. But I wasn't convinced. I couldn't come up with a satisfying explanation for that extraneous mamu or mum sound at the end. Until I remembered that there is a butler named Bensonmum, played by Alec Guinness of all people, in the 1976 comedy whodunit Murder by Death. With his bow tie, bald pate, and tailcoat, Guinness's James Sir Bensonmum looks rather a lot like the butler machine. More so than the Silver Fox Raymond does, at least. I couldn't find any information about the film's popularity in Japan, but it was dubbed and released there under the name Meitante Tojo, The Great Detective Appears. And it's hard to imagine Imagawa, of all people, missing out on a film that starred David Niven, Maggie Smith, Peter Sellers, Alec Guinness, Peter Falk, and Truman Capote, playing parodies of the most famous characters from the golden age of detective fiction. As for where the Bensoman version of the name came from, that remains a mystery. Was it official, either a mistake or a knowing attempt to obfuscate the reference? Did a fan translator make an error that got passed along for years in a game of telephone, eventually infiltrating official sources? I suppose we may never know. Or maybe it'll be like DoozyBots, and I'll get an email in a few weeks from someone saying, "Oh yeah, that was me. I did it for the sheer thrill of messing with Gundam fans. I love spreading misinformation." Incidentally, if you're now thinking of watching Murder by Death, you should know going in that there are 5 main characters, and one of them, played by Peter Sellers, is in yellowface and doing a really awful Chinese accent the whole time. It's a send-up of the old Charlie Chan detective films from the 20s and 30s, which featured a string of Japanese and European actors playing the eponymous Chinese-Hawaiian detective. But how much leeway that kind of wink and nod parody buys the film is for you to decide.
Next week on MSB episode 11.21, The Death Army Strikes Back. We will research and discuss G Gundam episode 21 and... it's the finals countdown! Finals? But it's only episode 21! George sees something he shouldn't. If your crest remains engaged for longer than 2 weeks, consult a doctor. Argo tests some limits. Toulon really is a slow learner. A near-death army experience. Tremors. By gad, that's Master Asia's music. And saved by the love of a good woman, your 4 closest bros, and a masked weirdo. Ready, go!
Mobile Suit Breakdown is written, recorded, and produced by us, Tom and Nina, in scenic New York City, within the ancestral and unceded land of the Lenape people, and made possible by listeners like you. The opening track is Wasp by Misha Dioxin. The closing music is Long Way Home by Spinning Ratio, and the recap music is Window by 1000 Hands. You can find links to the sources for our research, the music used in the episode, additional information about the Lenape people, and more in the show notes on our website, GundamPodcast.com. You can get in touch with us by email at hosts@GundamPodcast.com. If you'd like to support the show, please tell your friends about us, leave us a nice review wherever you listen to podcasts, or if you'd like to support us financially, you can do so at GundamPodcast.com/Patreon. Or look for other ways to support the show at GundamPodcast.com/support. Most of all, thank you for listening. I think we have a book that attempts to define Moe. I can dig it out for you.
The more out of touch our references will be. I'm looking forward to it. We can use our influence to introduce the youths to, old music and memes and internet flash videos.
Assuming we can continue to capture the youth demographic.
I think there are always going to be new young Gundam fans who want to know, is the physics behind that weapon actually feasible? I have to say something, and we're probably going to cut it, but right?
Yes?
Okay, I just want to be clear. We're going to have to cut this. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Oh no, I might become a cool immortal cyborg? Ooh, I'll grow incredibly strong but also turn evil? Big deal. Plenty of people do that anyway, and they don't get sweet robo-scales and regeneration powers in the process. Get over yourself. Give me the DG cells. I would use them for good.
But the true fear is over loss of control.
Control is an illusion.
Not according to G Gundam, it's not.